So I'm just finalising my settings for the image I'm about to capture behind me here. I've already took one shot which I'll talk about in a moment, but I'm just taking a slightly different composition. But what a morning, this is magical. It's one of the nicest mornings I've ever been out in. It's deceptively cold, there's still a chill to the air. You may see off in the distance there's some snow in the mountains, but it's just stunning, it really is. There's no wind, I can hear the gentle ripple in the water. There's very little movement in it. There's some wonderful reflections and there's some nice bird song. So it really is a nice morning to be out. I couldn't ask for more really. So for the image I'm taking behind me, I've been out since sunrise today and I've been waiting until the sun got high enough in the sky to clear the hill to my left. And that was so it would cast its really nice morning light on the trees off in the distance here. They really are nice, and it's a lovely setting with the mountain, the snow-capped mountains off in the distance. So the first image I captured was a wider shot, taking in some of the nice curve on the reflections on the loch in front of me. But I've also wanted to take a much more zoomed in shot. So for the first one I was at roughly 80mm. For the one I'm about to capture, I'm much closer to 200mm, and that is so I can get more of the detail in the trees in the mountain, but also to give me a second option. The first one was the reflection shot. This one I'm at a focal length, so I go beyond the sky area in the reflections, and I'm only taking in a thinner strip of water, visualizing a 16:9 crop, which eliminates the sky and it just takes in the darker area of the water. And I think that's a nice option to complement my first image. I don't know which one I'll prefer, taking in more of the reflections in the sky or the more zoomed in image, eliminating the sky and the reflections and showing more of the detail in the tree line and the mountains. But that's what it's all about. Sometimes you can come to a scene and you instantly know the composition and you know that's going to be your favourite. But when I look at both of these, they both look really nice. So it's hard to pick a favourite at this moment, but I'm sure I'll be able to do that when I come to edit the images. So for my second shot that I'm just about to take here, as I said, I'm at very close to 200mm, 1/100th of a second, ISO 100. There's plenty of light today, no reason to go any higher, and I'm at f8 for my aperture, simply because it's quite a nice sharp point on this lens. I could use something like f6.3 and still have plenty of depth of field. My foreground, if you like, starts way off nearer the trees, so I don't need a huge depth of field, but f8 is perfectly fine, giving me a nice fast shutter speed as well. There's no wind movement, so I really could use a variety of settings here to get a nice image. But anyway, the exposure set, capture the image, and it just looks really nice. As I say, I'm visualizing a 16:9 crop for this one, but what a morning. So you've now seen me capture this actual image on location, and in just a minute I'm going to go through the full editing process of the image. I've got the raw file here open in front of me in Adobe Lightroom and ready to go. But very briefly before I start the editing, I want to talk generally about my approach to photography and my approach to image editing. So I think as landscape photographers it's very important that we capture scenes or subjects that we like, and then we should really edit them in a way that gives us an end result that we're happy with and proud of. And I think there's a number of ways that we can actually do this. I think some people prefer to capture an image, but already as they're capturing that image, they're visualizing a final edit. They know that once they get into post-processing, they're going to quite heavily edit that image, and the final edited image may not resemble accurately. In fact, it could be quite different from the original scene that they captured, and that is perfectly fine to do that. And then I think at the other end of the spectrum, and of course there's all different levels of editing in between, but there's some people who like to do very little editing, and they're more just trying to get the image resembling what they captured at the actual time they were there on location. So for myself personally, I believe that if I capture an image correctly on camera, in nice conditions with lighting that I'm happy with, once I get into post-processing, my editing remains very, very simple, and I'm just trying to get the image back the way it looked when I actually captured it. I really think that my best images, the ones that I'm happiest with, are the ones that require least editing. This is purely my opinion, it's the way I like to approach my photography. And as I say, it's really up to the photographer to decide the types of images they like to capture and how little or how much they like to edit them. But as I say, I like to keep things very, very simple and do minimal editing. Now, of course, some images will require more editing than others. Perhaps there's a lot of dynamic range, perhaps you focus stacked and so on. Those of course require a bit more time and effort, but generally I like to keep things as simple as possible, and my entire goal is just to get the image looking very close to how it was when I actually captured it on location. So let's get on to the actual editing of this image. Now I think I talked about in the video how I was visualizing a 16:9 crop for this particular image, and that's what I set up in my camera. So this is the crop straight out of camera, 16:9. I'm perfectly happy with that. I don't need to make any changes to the crop. So the first thing I'll go down and do is I always tick remove chromatic aberration. I don't think there's a particular need to do it for this image, but I always tick it out of habit anyway, it can't do any harm. Then for enable profile corrections, looking at this image, I don't really feel there's any need to turn that on. I'm perfectly happy with the look of it as is. So heading back up to the top, I had the white balance set in auto when I captured this image, and it's come out very close to a daylight white balance, and it looks absolutely fine to my eyes. Daylight would have been the correct setting for this image, and I'm very close to that in the auto setting, so I'm perfectly happy just to leave it the way it is. So the first thing I want to do is subtly adjust the highlights. So I think the biggest adjustment for the highlights I want to make is probably in the sky, so we'll do that separately, but initially I'll just make a small adjustment going just by how it looks nice to my eyes for the overall image, and I think roughly about there is enough. I don't really want to go any further than that. There's not a huge amount needed in terms of the adjustment of the highlights. Shadows is perfectly fine. I can see plenty of detail in the shadows, and I quite like how some of the trees are brighter standing out against the darker background, so I don't really want to bring up any of the shadows. All the detail in the image is fine in the shadow areas, but I can always revisit that later if I feel there is a need. I do however want to adjust my white point, so let's have a look at that. So I'm working on a Mac. I'm going to hold down the Option key. You'll need to hold down a different key probably if you're on PC. That should be easy enough to find out, but I'm just going to bring this up until I can start to see some signs I'm going too far, and there we are. So round about 23, that looks perfectly fine to me. As I said, I can always go and revisit that later. Now having a look at the blacks here, I don't want to make them too dark, but I do want to darken things just a little bit. So I'm just going to slide this down until it looks good to my eye. So I think here we're starting to go a bit too dark, so I'm going to ease off, go back up a little bit. Maybe about there, that looks fine to me at the moment. So now just pausing for a second to take a look at the image as a whole. You will notice by looking off into the distance at the mountains and the sky, there was a little bit of haze or mist hanging around on this particular day, and you can see snow there on the mountains. So the pale blue, almost grey look of the sky, that's just how it was that day, but I want to enhance this a little bit. And I'm wondering if a little bit of dehaze could just help bring out a little bit of detail in the image, particularly in the mountains and the sky, but also just down into the tree line there. So I don't want to overdo this, I'm going to gradually go up, and then already there I think the effect is too much. So I'm working with something very, very subtle here. I think probably about 4 is all I want to really do. I'm going to address the sky separately with a graduated filter in just a little while, but for the moment, just by adding 4, I think that's done a little something to the image that I'm quite pleased with the look of. Now once this video is rendered and up on YouTube, you may not see all the subtle changes I'm making when I move some of these sliders just a little amount, but it is apparent to me here sitting, looking and actually editing the image. So things are starting to look quite nice in my opinion for this particular image in terms of the edit, but I do want to add some vibrance and saturation. Now typically I don't like to go very far on saturation at all. I may leave it at 0 or I may just bump it up very, very slightly. For this image I'm just going to boost it by 1, which is a tiny amount, but it's got the most small of effects and I quite like that. It's just very, very subtle. The main slider I'm going to work with is vibrance. So if we increase this, I'm just going to go up, and I'm now feeling I've went way too far with this image, so I'm going to ease back until I get to a sort of level that I'm happy with. I don't want to make everything too vibrant, and I think around 24 is giving it a nice look. And overall I'm reasonably happy with how the image is looking, but I do want to work on the sky a little bit. So for that I'm going to bring in a graduated filter, and I'm just going to drag that down probably around there, and this one has got exposure set -4, but we're not going to stick to that obviously. What I'm going to do now is bring in a range mask and set it for luminance. So I just want to try and adjust the brighter areas as much as possible and a bit of the mountain area. Now some of the tree line is quite bright at the very tops where the sun was hitting it with that nice morning golden glow. And I don't think I'll be able to eliminate all of that by using a range mask, but as much as possible, and we don't need to be too precise here, but we're just going to drag this up. I'm holding down the option key in my Mac until I feel that it's not affecting the tree line too much, but it is affecting the mountains a little bit and all of the sky. So let's just adjust the slider till we feel we're getting about the correct amount. I think roughly about there. 50 seems to be giving the effect that I'm happy with. So we'll get rid of that exposure adjustment, and here we have our graduated filter in place. So the first thing I want to work on is the highlights. So let's drag these down and see what happens. Now there won't be a lot of detail in the sky, but I'm just looking at the effect on the colours and the detail in the mountains and so on, and just being mindful of the effect to the tree line. Now here already I feel I've just went past the point I want to be at, and if I continue going down I definitely feel that's much too far. So I'm going to ease back a little bit, possibly up to maybe about there. That looks fine to my eye. And I'm just trying to bring back the sky to be close to the way I actually saw it on that particular day. Now I want to see what happens when I add a little bit of clarity. That's just subtly bringing out a little bit of detail in the mountains. Again, clarity can be quite dangerous, so if you go way too far things start looking not good very quickly. So I just want to ease that back so I sort of feel it's doing something, which is positive, but not overdoing it. So I'm going to stick around 20 for that. And then I'd like to try and bring out a little bit more colour in the sky. So I'm going to use saturation for this. And again, you need to be careful. If you go too crazy, you'll change things dramatically, but I'm just going to go, yeah, I'm going past the point that I'm happy at now. So I'm going to slide back a bit. I think probably about there, 30, that would be fine. I'm maybe just going to adjust the highlights back down a little bit now that I've made the other two adjustments. Maybe around 70. So now the sky is looking really nice. That's more in tune with how I saw it on this particular morning. So I'll close that. And that's looking pretty good now to my eye. So I maybe want to work on the light and dark areas a little bit just to see what I can do there. So if I just brighten these, again, I'm not going to go too far with these. I already feel that's a little bit too much. Maybe about 8, and then I'll see what happens when I just darken the darks a little bit. That's looking quite nice there. I'm going to set these an even match. I think 8 is working quite nicely for this image. So I quite like the look of that. Now let's have a look at the image as a whole and just see if there's anything I don't particularly like about it. It looks pretty good to me at the way it is really in the adjustments I've made. However, I'm noticing this is catching my eye a little bit. This area on the tree here is a little bit brighter than most of the other ones, and it's kind of drawing my attention to it a little bit. It's nothing significant, but I think I really need to work on that area. So what I'm going to do for that one is just use a brush, to be honest, and I don't really need to spend too much time doing it. So we'll get a brush set up here, and I'm probably going to leave on the auto mask, and if I can just zoom in here a little bit to see what I'm doing a bit better. So I've zoomed in a couple of times here, and I'm just going to brush over the areas that are sort of catching my attention. The auto mask is doing a pretty good job at the moment. I'm using quite a small brush here. You don't need to be too precise, to be honest, but the auto mask is making the job quite easy. So just subtle adjustments to the image, that's all I'm trying to make. Get rid of the exposure. Now I'm just trying to make the tree blend in a little bit more with the other ones, and I don't really think I need to do a huge amount to achieve that. So I'm just going to slowly drag down the white point until I get it sort of fitting in with the other ones, and I think -12 is doing the job perfectly for me there. So if I close that and zoom back out, and now hopefully you can see, I can see clearly in my monitor as I look at this image, but it's just blending in more and it's not sort of dragging your attention to it. So I'm just casting my eyes over the image a final time just to have a look at the adjustments I've made, and I think I still need to bring down the overall brightness of the tree here in this particular area just a little bit more. So I'm going to go back into that brush adjustment. The whites are set at -12. I'm going to drag that down. It's just a subtle adjustment, maybe -15, perhaps just a hint more. It's very, very small subtle adjustments, but I think somewhere around there is fine. So it's -17, and I'll just sit back, have another look over the image, and I can't really see anything that is distracting to my eye or making me unhappy with the image. So I really think that's the final image now. So let's have a quick look at the before, have a look at the raw image and the final edit. So that's going to be it for this particular image. I hope you found it interesting and somewhat useful. That covers my general approach to photography and image editing. If you've enjoyed watching or found it useful, a like rating is always appreciated. And if you've not yet subscribed to my channel but you liked this video and would like to see more, please feel free to subscribe. But for now, thank you so much for your time, thanks for watching, and I'll hopefully see you in my next one.